The day Duke Edmund gave his wife's salt works to another man, he had Adelaide's chair removed from the council chamber. She noticed the empty space before she noticed Mr. Percival Vane holding the iron ring of keys that had hung at her waist for 11 years. "Effective immediately," Edmund announced. "Mr. Vane will assume control of the furnaces, warehouses, evaporation beds, and all military contracts belonging to Ashcombe." Adelaide remained standing at the far end of the table. Around her sat the estate solicitor, the steward, 3 military suppliers, and Lord Westmere, the royal commissioner, who had spent the previous month praising Vane's plans to double production. No one met her eyes. 11 years earlier, Ashcombe's marshes had been dismissed as fever-ridden waste. Adelaide had mapped the tides herself, redesigned the drainage channels, and introduced shallow evaporation beds that produced cleaner salt while using less coal. What had begun with 12 laborers now employed more than 200 people and supplied preserved meat to 5 military garrisons. Yet Edmund spoke as if he were rescuing the estate from an embarrassing feminine indulgence. "You are making this change 3 days before the Crown's inspection," Adelaide said. "Why?" "Because Ashcombe can no longer afford hesitation." "Is that what you call refusing unsafe equipment?" Vane leaned back in her former chair. "Her Grace refers to the new refining pans. I refer to cheap pans whose lining breaks down under concentrated brine. The manufacturer guarantees them. The manufacturer does not eat what they produce." A faint smile passed across Lord Westmere's face. "The Crown requires greater volume, Your Grace," he said. "Mr. Vane has offered a practical solution. A seat may soon open on the Royal Trade Council, and men who solve military shortages are remembered." There it was, not necessity, not safety, advancement. A month earlier, Edmund had asked Adelaide to approve Vane's proposal. She had shown him estimates, proving that the Western furnace could not double production without eliminating cooling time, independent testing, or both. Edmund had called her overly cautious. Vane had called her disloyal. Now 2 estate guards stood beside the door. Adelaide looked at her husband. "You have read my report." "I have. You know why I refused to sign the new process. I know that every improvement proposed by Mr. Vane has met with your opposition, because every improvement removed a safeguard." Edmund's jaw tightened. Once, he had trusted her enough to mortgage a hunting lodge and finance the first evaporation beds. But the profits had brought ministers, commissioners, and promises of influence. Somewhere between the first royal contract and Lord Westmere's arrival, Edmund had begun to hear caution as defiance. "The decision is final," he said. Vane lifted the ring of keys. The Duchess need no longer burden herself with commercial matters. Adelaide unfastened the small brass brine gauge from her belt and placed it on the table before him. "This measures whether the brine is ready for the pan," she said. "The markings are based upon the water in these marshes. If you do not understand them, ask someone who does. I believe I can manage salt water." "No, you believe you can manage the people who understand it." The amusement vanished from his face. Adelaide turned to Edmund. "If you proceed without independent inspection, put that order in writing." A silence followed. Edmund knew what she was doing. A written order would preserve the precise moment he chose ambition over her warning. His private secretary, Mr. Harrow, dipped a pen into the ink. Edmund stopped him. "That will not be necessary." "Then you are willing to take my authority," Adelaide said, "but not responsibility for what follows." She left before they could mistake her composure for surrender. Outside the council house, nearly 40 salt workers had gathered beneath the gray morning sky. Furnace women with scarred forearms stood beside carters and marsh laborers whose boots were permanently whitened by brine. Old Amos Reed, the chief foreman, removed his cap. Adelaide gave him the slightest shake of her head. If the workers protested now, Vane would dismiss them before she understood what he intended to change. As she crossed the yard, 2 men raised their chisels to the stone plaque above the gates. "Adelaide Works," it read. The first blow broke the A. The second struck as she passed beneath it. By evening, Vane's new production schedule had already begun. From an upper window of Ashcombe House, Adelaide watched covered wagons enter the western yard long after the legal loading hour. They carried no inspection ribbons. Several were drawn by unfamiliar teams, and black mud coated their wheels. Ashcombe's loading yard was paved with crushed shell. No wagon leaving the official warehouses should have carried marsh clay beneath its axles. A maid hurried into the room. "Your Grace, a cavalryman has arrived from Fort Halden. The butler says His Grace is dining with Lord Westmere." "Why has the man come?" "He says soldiers are ill." Adelaide found the rider in the entrance hall, gripping the back of a chair to remain upright. Mud covered his boots, and sweat darkened his uniform collar despite the winter cold. "The fort received Ashcombe provisions yesterday," he said. 37 men collapsed after supper. Major Bell sent me for whoever supervises the salt. The butler glanced uneasily toward the dining room. "Mr. Vane now holds that position." "Then summon him," Adelaide said. Vane appeared with Edmund and Lord Westmere several minutes later. The smell of roasted meat and claret followed them into the hall. "Fort Halden is not your concern," Vane said after hearing the message. "The illness is almost certainly spoiled beef. Then you will lose nothing by allowing me to inspect it. You no longer represent the works." Adelaide faced Edmund. 37 soldiers are ill after eating provisions bearing our crest. Will you come with me?" His hesitation lasted only a second, but everyone saw it. Lord Westmere spoke quietly beside him. "A duke should not race across the countryside whenever a kitchen reports indigestion. Mr. Vane can send a clerk in the morning." Adelaide looked at the exhausted cavalrymen. "Some of them may not have until morning." Edmund's face hardened under the commissioner's gaze. "You may go as my representative, but you will issue no orders concerning the works." "I am going for the soldiers," she replied. "Not for your permission." Fort Halden's lower hall had been converted into an infirmary. Men lay between benches while surgeons moved among them. Some suffered violent sickness and abdominal pain. Others trembled beneath blankets, their faces pale with shock. Major Bell met Adelaide outside the kitchen. "They all ate from the same pot," he said. "Salt beef, barley, and onions. The officers are unaffected." "Did the officers eat the same beef?" "No. Their table received fresh meat from the local butcher. That distinction mattered." Adelaide asked Bell to close the kitchen and preserve everything separately. The remaining stew, the cooking pot, the salt, the packing straw, and the barrel itself. He gave the orders without questioning whether a duchess belonged in a military kitchen. The salt in the soldiers' storeroom was gray, fine, and uneven. Ashcombe salt normally formed clean, broad flakes after slow cooling. This product had either been rushed through the pans or ground to conceal its original appearance. She did not taste it. Instead, she spread a small quantity across a white plate. Dark specks remained among the crystals. "What are they?" Bell asked. "I cannot tell you without a proper examination, but they should not be there." The barrel bore Ashcombe's lion crest. Adelaide studied the impression and felt the first cold certainty settle inside her. The lion's raised paw faced inward. On the genuine Ashcombe stamp, it faced outward. She examined the lower hoops. Damp black clay clung beneath them, matching the mud she had seen on the wagons entering the western yard. Someone had packed this barrel in the marshes, away from the official warehouses, and marked it with a counterfeit brand. "This salt did not come from my refining house," she said. Bell's expression sharpened. "Can you prove that?" "I can prove the barrel seal is false. To prove where the salt was made, I need the production registers, the coal accounts, and samples from every operating pan. Who controls those records?" "The man my husband appointed this morning." Adelaide sealed samples in clean glass jars and signed across the paper wrappings. Bell added his military seal, ensuring Vane could not later claim she had altered them. As she prepared to leave, a quartermaster entered, carrying a dispatch ledger. "Major, you asked whether any other Ashcombe provisions were received." Bell took the book. "What did you find?" "A second consignment passed Fort Halden before dawn. 12 barrels of salt." "Where was it sent?" Adelaide asked. The quartermaster turned the ledger toward her. The destination was not another garrison. It was the temporary supply depot serving the regiment assigned to guard the King's autumn progress. The shipment was scheduled to be opened the following evening. Adelaide stared at the counterfeit lion pressed into the barrel beside her. Edmund had taken her keys because he believed that meant she could no longer interfere. Before the next tide, he would discover how little authority a key possessed in the hands of a man who did not understand what he had stolen. Adelaide returned to Ashcombe shortly after dawn with Major Bell's sealed receipt inside her coat. The contaminated salt remained at Fort Halden under military guard. Bell had also sent a sample to an independent apothecary experienced in examining minerals. Until the substance was identified, Adelaide would claim only what she could prove. The salt was abnormal, the barrel seal was counterfeit, and the shipment did not appear in the records she had supervised. She found Edmund in his study with Vane, Lord Westmere, and Mr. Harrow. A dispatch ledger lay open on the desk. Vane spoke first. "Fort Halden has accused Ashcombe of supplying contaminated provisions." "Fort Halden has accused no one," Adelaide replied. "It has secured the evidence." Edmund's face was drawn from a sleepless night. The shipment left before Mr. Vane assumed control. Adelaide understood immediately. The timing had been chosen to place the barrels under her authority. "Then show me the loading order." Harrow passed her a document bearing the Ashcombe seal. It listed 12 barrels sent to Fort Halden, and 12 more destined for the regiment guarding the king. At the bottom appeared Adelaide's name. The handwriting resembled hers, but the signature was too careful. Whoever had copied it had reproduced each letter without understanding that Adelaide signed quickly, allowing the final stroke to cross the one before it. "This is forged." Vane gave a humorless laugh. "How convenient." Adelaide held the document toward the window. "The wax may carry Ashcombe's seal, but I did not sign this order. Nor would I have authorized a military shipment without an inspection ribbon and the counter-signature of the chief foreman. Perhaps you chose to ignore your own rules," Lord Westmere said. "Then the loading ledger will show which workers handled the barrels." Harrow closed the book on the desk. "The records are now under Mr. Vane's authority. Edmund did not order him to reopen it." Adelaide placed Major Bell's receipt beside the false dispatch. "The barrel at Fort Halden carries a counterfeit crest. The lion's paw faces the wrong direction. A damaged stamp," Vane said. "The original iron brand has not changed in 14 years. I checked it myself every quarter. You no longer have access to it, because you took the keys yesterday." Vane's expression hardened. He had hoped to make her loss of authority appear incriminating, but the sequence worked against him. Only after Adelaide was barred from the works had she become unable to compare the seals. She turned to Edmund. "The second consignment will be opened tomorrow evening. Send one order to detain it until Bell's examination is complete." Lord Westmere rose from his chair. Halting provisions for the king's escort on the strength of a disputed barrel would cause unnecessary alarm. 37 sick soldiers are not unnecessary alarm. The Crown will not thank Ashcombe for disrupting a royal progress. "No," Adelaide said. "But it may remember who insisted the shipment continue after receiving a warning." Edmund looked from Westmere to the military receipt. For a moment, Adelaide believed he would act. Then Vane placed another document before him. "This is the inspection certificate for both consignments. Mr. Thomas Weller examined the salt before it left." Adelaide recognized Weller's seal and signature. He had inspected Ashcombe's military supply for nearly 20 years. "When did he conduct this examination?" "Yesterday morning," Vane replied. "That is impossible. Mr. Weller has been confined to his bed since Sunday." "He recovered." "Then summon him." He left for London after completing his duties. A sick man rose from bed, inspected 24 barrels, and began a 60-mile journey without speaking to his assistant? Vane's confidence did not change, but Edmund glanced down at the certificate. Adelaide pressed her advantage. "Send a rider to Weller's house. Until he is found, detain the royal shipment." Edmund folded the certificate. "I will send someone to verify his whereabouts. And the barrels? They will remain sealed until noon. That gives us less than 6 hours. It is the concession I am prepared to make. It was not caution, it was calculation." Edmund wanted enough delay to protect himself if Adelaide proved correct, but not enough to offend Westmere if she failed. Adelaide collected Major Bell's receipt. "Then I will bring you proof before noon." "You will remain outside the works," Vane said. She looked at him. "You control the gates. You do not control arithmetic." The official books Adelaide had maintained before her removal were copied monthly for the estate treasury. Harrow possessed the current volume, but an earlier copy remained with the solicitor. It showed the capacity of every furnace, the coal delivered to each one, and the quantity of salt stored before the disputed wagons departed. Even if every official pan had worked without interruption, Ashcombe could not have produced the additional 24 barrels. The false salt had been made somewhere else. Adelaide found Amos Reed waiting inside the ruined orangery at the edge of the grounds. With him stood Ruth Mercer, a furnace woman whose forearms bore years of pale scars from boiling brine. Vane had dismissed them both before sunrise. "He asked who checked the western pans after dark," Ruth said. "When I answered that no furnace was authorized to run after midnight, Mr. Pike took my name from the work list." Amos handed Adelaide a crumpled coal receipt. "3 carts arrived last week," he said. "None entered the main yard." They continued west along the marsh road. Were they carrying Ashcombe coal? No. Hard black coal from Northmere. Adelaide unfolded an estate map across an empty planting table. The official furnaces stood east of the drainage wall, where finished barrels could reach the paved loading yard. West of it lay only reed beds, abandoned channels, and the remains of an old pumping station. She marked the route taken by the coal carts. Could the pumping station support a refining pan? Amos considered it. It still has a chimney, fresh water, and a culvert large enough to move fuel. But the building has been closed since before you came to Ashcombe. Has anyone seen smoke? Ruth nodded. 3 nights this week. Mr. Pike told us it came from burning marsh grass. Adelaide studied the map. The abandoned station stood beside the same black clay found beneath the counterfeit barrel. A hidden furnace there could produce salt without appearing in her ledgers. Its wagons could cross the Western Marsh Road and rejoin the military route without ever passing through the official yard. "Who works there?" she asked. Amos's expression changed. 6 laborers questioned the night deliveries. Vane dismissed them publicly, but none returned to the village. Where are their families? They were told the men had taken work in Dunmere. Ruth reached into her apron and placed a small brass token on the map. Each Ashcombe furnace worker carried one, stamped with his assigned pan number. "I found this near the western culvert this morning," she said. Dark blood marked one edge. The number belonged to a laborer who had supposedly left Ashcombe 2 days earlier. Adelaide closed her hand around the token. The pumping station was not merely producing counterfeit salt. Someone was being held inside it. Major Bell returned to Ashcombe with 8 mounted soldiers shortly before 10. The apothecary found a poisonous mineral compound in the salt, he told Adelaide. It did not enter through spoiled meat or ordinary storage. Someone added it before the barrel was sealed. Can he identify it? He believes so, but he will not sign a conclusion until he completes a second examination. Adelaide respected the caution. A suspected poison was not the same as proven poison, and Vane would exploit any claim made too early. She showed Bell the counterfeit seal, the coal receipt, and the blood-stained worker's token. "The salt sent to your men could not have been produced by the official furnaces," she said. "There is another refining house at the abandoned pumping station." Bell studied the map. "If military supplies were prepared there, I have authority to inspect them. Vane will say the building belongs to Ashcombe. Then he may explain that to the Crown after I have determined what poisoned my soldiers." They approached by the Western Marsh Road. Adelaide rode beside Bell, while Ruth and Amos followed in a cart. The soldiers carried no raised weapons, but their presence ensured that Vane's guards could not quietly turn them away. The pumping station appeared abandoned from the road. Reeds covered the lower walls, several windows had been boarded shut, and no smoke rose from its chimney. But the ground told a different story. Fresh wheel tracks crossed the black clay. Coal dust darkened the path near the rear entrance, and a narrow stream of warm water ran from the drainage culvert. "The furnace has operated this morning," Adelaide said. 2 estate guards stood before the door. "No one enters without Mr. Vane's authority," one said. Major Bell presented his written order. 37 soldiers were poisoned by barrels bearing Ashcombe's crest. "Stand aside." The guards exchanged a glance, but did not move. Then a dull blow sounded from inside the building. 3 strikes. A pause. 3 more. Amos stepped forward. "That is a furnace signal. The men use it when someone is trapped." Bell ordered his soldiers to open the door. The lock broke beneath the second strike. Heat and the bitter smell of coal rolled into the marsh air. The abandoned pumping station had been transformed into a crude refining house. 2 iron pans stood over brick furnaces. Racks of cooling salt filled the far wall, and dozens of finished barrels bore freshly burned Ashcombe crests. Adelaide moved to the nearest pan, but did not touch it. The brine had been boiled too quickly, leaving dirty foam hardened around its rim. The salt drying beside it was gray and fine, closely resembling the sample from Fort Halden. "Vane could never have passed this through an honest inspection," she said. "He did not intend to," Ruth replied. Major Bell's men searched the adjoining rooms. They found 4 laborers locked inside a coal store, including the owner of the blood-stained token. His name was Samuel Croft. A bandage covered a wound above his ear. "Mr. Pike told us the work was confidential," Samuel said after Bell freed him. "When we refused to seal the marked barrels, his men took our tokens and locked us here." "Why did you refuse?" Adelaide asked. Samuel pointed toward a workbench. A locked metal box stood beside a measuring scale. Bell opened it in the presence of 2 witnesses. Inside were small paper packets filled with pale powder. Adelaide recognized neither the substance nor its purpose. "Did you see this added to the salt?" Bell asked. "Only to certain barrels," Samuel replied. Pike kept a list. The rest were filled with ordinary salt so an inspector could open any one at random and find nothing wrong. That explained why the Eastern garrison had reported no illness. The entire production batch had never been contaminated. Only selected barrels had been altered. "Which destinations were on the list?" Adelaide asked. "Fort Halden and the King's Escort. There may have been others." Bell sealed the metal box rather than allowing anyone to handle its contents. "Where is the list?" "Pike took it when the soldiers arrived. A horse was already racing south across the marsh. Bell sent 3 men after him, but Adelaide knew the open road favored anyone with a lead. Capturing Pike was less important than preserving what he had left behind. They searched the office. Most of the documents had been removed, but the grate contained the remains of recently burned papers. Ruth used tongs to separate the fragments before the embers destroyed them completely. One surviving piece bore the name Northmere Provisioning. Another recorded a payment for 24 counterfeit barrel seals. Adelaide found something else beneath the desk. A broken iron stamp. Its lion's paw faced inward. Vane had copied her crest badly, because he had never understood that its smallest details were part of Ashcombe's inspection system. Amos opened a narrow cupboard and discovered production tallies covering the previous 6 weeks. They proved that the hidden furnace had been operating long before Edmund publicly transferred control of the salt works. Vane cannot claim he began this yesterday, Bell said. No, Adelaide replied, but he could not have built it without access to Ashcombe money, coal routes, and military orders. Someone with authority had protected the operation before Adelaide was removed. They returned to the house before noon with the rescued workers and sealed evidence. Lord Westmere had already departed, supposedly to inform the Crown that Adelaide was interfering with military production. Vane was nowhere to be found. Edmund waited in the council chamber with Harrow. Adelaide's chair remained absent, while the ring of keys still lay beside Vane's empty place. Major Bell set the counterfeit stamp on the table. This was found inside an unauthorized refinery on Ashcombe land. 4 workers were imprisoned there. A poisonous substance was deliberately added to barrels intended for my garrison and the king's escort. Edmund stared at the broken crest. I authorized no poison. No, Adelaide said. But you authorized the furnace. His eyes lifted to hers. Harrow moved toward the door, but Bell's soldiers blocked his way. Adelaide placed the 6-week production tallies before her husband. This operation began while I still controlled the official works. Vane could not have concealed a new building, labor force, coal supply, and military route without protection from someone above him. Edmund's silence answered before his words did. At last, he opened a locked drawer and removed a document bearing his signature. Lord Westmere told me the Crown required a confidential reserve furnace, he said. I gave Vane permission to establish it. You did so after I warned you that his process was unsafe. He assured me the salt would be independently inspected. And when he asked that the furnace be hidden from me, Edmund looked toward the empty place where her chair had stood. I agreed. Adelaide had expected deception from Vane. She had not expected Edmund to confess that he had built the deception a room in which to thrive. Major Bell picked up the authorization. The royal shipment must be detained immediately. Edmund's face changed. He crossed to the window overlooking the southern road. The yard below was empty. The wagons were ordered to remain until noon, he said. Harrow looked at the clock. It is not yet noon. No, Adelaide replied, seeing the fresh wheel marks beyond the gates. But someone released them early. Major Bell sent riders toward the Royal Supply Depot within minutes. Adelaide remained in the council chamber with Edmund. Between them lay the broken stamp, the hidden furnace records, and his signed authorization. Why did you conceal the furnace from me? She asked. Edmund looked toward Bell's soldiers rather than at her. Westmere said secrecy was necessary to prevent rival suppliers from learning how Ashcombe intended to increase production. That explains why you hid it from Northmere. It does not explain why you hid it from your own superintendent. You had already rejected Vane's proposal, because he wanted to remove independent inspection. Edmund said nothing. Adelaide understood then that he had known more than he had admitted. Not about the poison, perhaps, but about the safeguards Vane intended to discard. What exactly did you authorize? A reserve furnace operating under Vane's management. Temporary workers. Separate accounts. And inspections? Vane said Westmere would provide a Crown examiner. Did you ever ask for that examiner's name? No. Did you receive a single signed report? Edmund's silence was answer enough. He had not been deceived by a perfect lie. He had accepted promises he found useful and refused to examine them closely. Mr. Harrow stood near the door, visibly uneasy. Who released the wagons? Adelaide asked him. I conveyed no such order. Then show Major Bell the gate register. Harrow hesitated. Bell held out his hand. The register revealed that the wagons had departed shortly after 11. Beside the entry was an order carrying Edmund's seal, but no signature. Edmund examined it. I did not issue this. Who has access to your seal? Bell asked. My secretary. The estate steward. Mr. Vane when conducting official business. Then your authority has become a weapon anyone near you can use, Adelaide said. Edmund flinched, but she felt no satisfaction. Men were carrying poisoned salt toward the king's soldiers while her husband confronted the consequences of powers he had distributed carelessly. Bell returned to the map. The southern road divides at Dunmere. One branch reaches the Royal Depot. The other joins the coast road. My riders may lose the wagons at the fork. They will not take either branch, Adelaide said. Bell looked up. 24 barrels would require at least 4 heavy wagons. The Dunmere Bridge has been under repair since spring. Loaded carts are restricted to 1 at a time, and the toll-keeper records every military consignment. Then where are they going? Adelaide traced the old marsh road westward. Here, the Salt Causeway crosses the tidal flats and rejoins the royal route beyond the bridge. Edmund studied the map. That road floods at high tide, which is why Vane released the wagons early. He needs them across before the afternoon water covers the stones. Bell checked the clock. How long do we have? Less than 2 hours. Edmund reached for the bell cord. I will summon more guards. Your guards allowed the wagons to leave. They obeyed an order bearing my seal. That is precisely why I will not entrust this to another order bearing your seal. His face hardened. You cannot command my men. No, but I can ask the people whose names Vane removed from the work lists. Adelaide turned toward the door. Edmund caught her arm. If workers confront a military shipment and Westmere claims it was authorized, they could be charged with theft, or worse. Then come with us and publicly declare the shipment detained. He released her. The royal progress begins tomorrow. If this scandal reaches London before we know who is responsible, Ashcombe will lose every military contract. Adelaide stared at him. 37 soldiers lay ill. 4 workers had been imprisoned. Poisoned barrels were moving toward the king's escort. Yet Edmund still measured the truth against the value of his contracts. You know enough to stop the wagons, she said. The only question is whether you are willing to lose anything by doing it. I am trying to protect this estate. No, you are trying to protect the benefits of a decision you already know was wrong. She left him standing beside the evidence. Ruth and Amos had gathered nearly 30 dismissed workers outside the ruined warehouse. Among them were carters who knew every track across the marsh, furnace women who could identify Ashcombe barrels by weight, and drainage men who understood the tides better than any printed table. Adelaide explained the danger without ordering anyone to follow. If the barrels reach the royal route, more soldiers may die. Anyone who comes with me risks dismissal and possible arrest. Amos put on his cap. We were dismissed this morning. Ruth lifted a length of heavy chain from a supply cart. And those are not Vane's roads. We built them. Every worker remained. They took 2 empty salt wagons and traveled west. Bell followed with his soldiers, carrying the sealed evidence that gave their intervention military authority. At the last rise before the tidal flats, Adelaide saw 4 covered wagons moving along the exposed causeway. They had reached the center, where deep water lay on both sides and no vehicle could turn. Bell prepared to ride after them. Wait, Adelaide said. The first streams of the returning tide were already crossing the lowest stones. A mounted charge might frighten the wagon teams and overturn the barrels into the channel. She pointed toward an old sluice gate beside the upper drainage bank. If we open that gate, the eastern channel will fill first. The wagons will be forced to stop on the only high section of the causeway. And if the drivers refuse, they cannot outrun the sea. Adelaide took the iron wheel with Ruth and Amos. Together, they forced it around. Water surged through the drainage channel and spread across the road ahead of the convoy. The drivers pulled hard on their reins. One wagon stopped, then another. The workers stretched their chain across the dry stones behind them. For the first time since Edmund had taken her keys, Adelaide stood between Vane and the thing he intended to steal. Then the rear canvas of the final wagon lifted. Mr. Vane stepped down, holding Adelaide's original iron barrel stamp in his hand. Vane raised Adelaide's original stamp for everyone to see. You recognize this, I presume. I recognize something stolen from the official warehouse, Adelaide replied, or removed by its former superintendent before she was dismissed. His accusation was intended for Major Bell. If the genuine stamp were found among poisoned barrels, Vane could claim Adelaide had marked them herself. Bell rode onto the high section of the causeway with 2 soldiers. This convoy is detained under military authority, he announced. No wagon will move until its cargo has been examined. Vane slipped the stamp into his coat. These provisions travel under a confidential order from Lord Westmere. Then Lord Westmere may explain that order to the military board. Place the stamp on the ground. You have no authority to search me. Bell gestured toward Samuel Croft, who had come with the workers. This man states that you imprisoned him after he refused to seal altered salt. I also found poisonous material and counterfeit brands inside a furnace operating under your control. You will surrender the stamp and remain here until a magistrate arrives." Vane looked toward the drivers, but none moved. The water had risen across both ends of the causeway, leaving the convoy trapped between Bell's soldiers and Adelaide's workers. At last, Vane placed the iron stamp on the stones. Adelaide did not touch it. Bell wrapped it in cloth and sealed it with military wax. They opened the wagons one at a time. Ruth recorded each barrel number, while Amos compared the marks with the hidden furnace tallies. Most contained coarse gray salt. Several had false crests, but 6 bore impressions from Adelaide's genuine stamp. The pattern was deliberate. The genuine mark had been used only on the barrels listed for the king's escort. Vane watched from beneath guard. "You controlled that stamp until yesterday," he said to Adelaide. "Nothing here proves when those barrels were marked." "No," she replied, "but the salt inside them may." She asked Bell to remove samples from the top, center, and bottom of each selected barrel. Every jar was numbered and sealed in front of witnesses. Adelaide refused to identify the pale particles mixed among the crystals. That determination belonged to the apothecary, not to her. One of the drivers began to tremble. "I did not know it was poison," he said. Vane turned on him. "Be silent." Bell moved between them. "Tell me what you were ordered to do." "Mr. Pike gave us 5 wagons at the western station. Mr. Vane joined us after we crossed the mill road." Adelaide looked along the causeway. There were only 4 wagons. "Where is the 5th?" The driver lowered his eyes. "It's separated at Bracken Fork." Vane's expression revealed more than the answer. "What did it carry?" Bell asked. 6 barrels. Mr. Pike said they had to reach the Royal Field Kitchen before the evening inspection. "How long ago?" "Nearly an hour." Bell immediately sent 4 mounted soldiers toward the Royal Road. The remaining men stayed to guard Vane, the drivers, and the detained cargo. Adelaide searched the lead wagon in Bell's presence. Beneath the driver's bench, she found a packet of route orders and a list of barrel numbers. 6 numbers had been circled in red, the same 6 impressed with her genuine stamp. At the bottom was a written instruction: "Deliver directly to the Royal Field Kitchen. Do not submit for further inspection." The order bore Adelaide's name. This forgery was better than the first. The final stroke crossed correctly, and the pressure of the pen rose and fell almost exactly as hers did. Only someone who had watched her sign hundreds of documents could have produced it. Bell examined the order. "Can you prove this is false?" "Not from the handwriting alone." Vane smiled faintly. Adelaide studied the paper instead. Ashcombe's official orders were cut from heavy cream stock purchased in Bath. This sheet was thinner, with a blue thread running through its fibers. She had seen that paper every morning for years. It came from Edmund's private study. Vane could have obtained the stamp, but he did not prepare the Duke's correspondence or keep paper in his locked desk. Someone inside Ashcombe House had created the order. A horn sounded from the eastern bank. The rising water had isolated them from the mainland, but a rider waited beyond the flooded stones, holding up a white cloth. It was one of Bell's soldiers. "The 5th wagon crossed the royal boundary," he shouted. The palace quartermaster accepted all 6 barrels before our men arrived. Adelaide looked at the forged order in her hands. The poison had entered the king's supply system under her name, and whoever had copied her signature was still inside her husband's house. By the time the tide released the causeway, Major Bell had sent 2 riders ahead with orders to isolate the 6 barrels. Adelaide reached the Royal Field Depot shortly before dusk. The salt had not yet entered the kitchen, but Lord Westmere stood beside it with the royal quartermaster and several officers. Edmund had arrived before her. Westmere held the forged order in one hand. "This shipment bears the Duchess's signature," he announced. The genuine Ashcombe stamp was found in the same convoy. It appears Lady Adelaide continued directing production after her husband removed her. Edmund looked at Adelaide. "Is this your signature?" "No. It closely resembles it." "That is the purpose of a forgery." Westmere addressed the officers. The Duchess opposed Ashcombe's new management. She possessed the knowledge and opportunity to discredit her successor. "And what would I gain by poisoning soldiers?" Adelaide asked. "The destruction of Mr. Vane and the restoration of your authority." Vane had been brought from the causeway under guard. He lowered his head, as if wounded by the accusation against her, but Adelaide saw satisfaction in his eyes. Major Bell placed the apothecary's report before the quartermaster. "The Fort Halden salt contains arsenic," he said. "The samples taken from 3 detained barrels contain the same substance. None is to be opened for use." A murmur moved through the officers. Westmere did not retreat. That proves the shipment was poisoned. It does not prove who poisoned it. No, Adelaide said. The barrels will, she asked the quartermaster to bring 1 container of legitimate Ashcombe salt from an earlier delivery. Then she placed it beside the 6 disputed barrels. The difference was visible before either was opened. The legitimate barrel used seasoned oak with double-pegged hoops. Its crest was centered above a small inspection notch cut into the upper rim. The disputed barrels were made from damp, cheaper wood, and their hoops were fastened with iron nails. Ashcombe stopped using nailed hoops 7 years ago, Adelaide said. Salt draws moisture. The nails rust, stain the product, and weaken the barrel. She opened both containers in the officer's presence. Clean Ashcombe salt formed broad flakes created by slow cooling. The disputed salt consisted of small gray crystals covered with coal dust and residue from rushed boiling. This product was made at the hidden furnace, she continued. Its pans burned Northmere coal. Ruth Mercer and Samuel Croft saw it produced. Major Bell found the counterfeit brands and poisonous powder inside the same building. Vane finally spoke. All of those witnesses are dismissed workers loyal to the Duchess. They were dismissed because they refused to seal your barrels. According to them, Adelaide turned one of the poisoned barrels and pointed to a dark line beneath its lower hoop. The clay came from the western marsh. The official loading yard is paved with shell. These barrels never passed through the works I supervised. Westmere's expression tightened, but he still had one defense. The genuine stamp was used upon them. Yes, after Vane took possession of my keys. Vane shook his head. The stamp disappeared before the transfer. Then show us the report you filed when you discovered it missing. He had none. Adelaide placed the forged order beside a sheet taken from Edmund's dispatch case. Both contained the same blue thread. This paper came from my husband's private study. Someone with access to Ashcombe House forged my signature and used Edmund's seal to release the wagons. Every face turned toward Edmund. He could have denied that the paper was his. Instead, he removed another sheet from his case and compared the fibers. She is correct, he said. This stock is kept in my locked writing room. Mr. Harrow, who had accompanied him, stood near the depot entrance. Adelaide watched his face carefully. He showed no surprise, only controlled concern. Westmere folded the forged order. Paper can be stolen. A resemblance proves nothing. Fortunately, the salt was inspected before shipment. He produced Thomas Weller's certificate. The Crown's appointed examiner signed this while the Duchess still controlled Ashcombe. Unless Mr. Weller denies his own seal, her accusations remain speculation. Then let him deny it, Adelaide replied. Edmund's rider had already returned from Weller's cottage. He stepped forward, mud covering his boots. Mr. Weller never traveled to London, he reported. His bed was empty, his medicine untouched, and the back door had been forced. When was he last seen? Bell asked. 2 nights ago. A neighbor saw a closed carriage outside his house. It carried no crest, but its wheels were covered in black marsh clay. Adelaide looked toward the western road. Weller had not inspected the poisoned salt. He had been taken because Vane needed his seal, and because a living inspector could expose every false certificate they had created. Amos recognized the black clay on the carriage wheels. There is an abandoned excise house along the western drainage road, he said. Pike's men have carried food there twice this week. Major Bell left Vane under military guard and took 6 soldiers to the building. They found Thomas Weller locked in an upstairs room, weak and bruised but alive. After a surgeon examined him, Weller gave his statement. I never inspected those barrels. Vane asked me to certify the hidden furnace 6 weeks ago. I refused because it had no independent records. What did he do? Adelaide asked. Lord Westmere visited me and claimed the operation was protected by the Crown. Then my seal disappeared. When I threatened to report it, Pike's men took me from my house. Westmere had not merely supported Vane. He had helped silence the only inspector who could expose the counterfeit shipments. Weller produced a strip of paper he had torn from Pike's ledger before being imprisoned. It listed payments for coal, false barrel stamps, carriage hire, and labor supplied through Northmere provisioning. Northmere bid against Ashcombe for the military contract last spring, Weller said. They could not match Lady Adelaide's purity standard. If Ashcombe's salt poisoned soldiers, the Crown would cancel the contract and give it to them. The plan was now clear. Vane had produced poisoned salt under Adelaide's name. Fort Halden would create the scandal, while the barrels sent to the king's escort would ensure Ashcombe could never recover. Edmund examined the payment numbers. These came from my confidential reserve account. Who could access it? Bell asked. Vane, under my furnace authorization. Harrow, with my written approval, and me. To prove which payments were genuine, Edmund would have to surrender his private correspondence. The letters would show that he had not ordered the poisoning, but they would also reveal every warning Adelaide had given him. Harrow intervened quickly. Your Grace, private letters may be misunderstood. Edmund looked at Adelaide. I will surrender them all. It was the first decision he had made that could genuinely cost him, but it did not erase the decisions that had brought them there. Bell sealed Edmund's study and examined the account books. 5 payments carried Edmund's signature. A 6th had been authorized that morning, while Edmund was with Adelaide at the Royal Depot. Only one man had remained in control of the financial records at Ashcombe House, Mr. Harrow. Mr. Harrow denied authorizing the 6th payment. The Duke often signed several orders at once, he said. This may have been prepared earlier and entered later. Edmund examined the signature. It resembles mine. That is not the same as remembering that you signed it, Adelaide said. Major Bell arranged the furnace orders, account withdrawals, and military dispatches across the council table. Some were unquestionably genuine. Edmund had authorized the hidden furnace, separate accounts, and Vane's freedom from estate supervision. Others directed poisoned barrels, counterfeit seals, and payments to Northmere laborers. Harrow insisted Edmund had signed everything. Adelaide compared the genuine letters with the disputed orders. The handwriting was nearly identical, but the pages had been prepared differently. Edmund wrote quickly and pressed his blotting paper down while the ink was still wet. His genuine documents carried faint traces of reversed writing. The disputed orders carried none. They were copied slowly and left to dry, Adelaide said. Someone studied Edmund's handwriting rather than writing naturally. Harrow remained calm. That proves only that a clerk prepared them. A clerk with access to his seal, paper, accounts, and private correspondence. Bell ordered Harrow detained until the documents could be examined by an independent writing expert. Edmund looked at the genuine authorization bearing his signature. Harrow forged the orders that carried the poison, he said. Yes, Adelaide replied. But he did not forge the decision that made the hidden furnace possible. Edmund met her eyes. You approved an operation you knew had no independent inspector. You allowed Vane to exclude me because my objections threatened your appointment. Harrow exploited your authority, but he did not create your ambition. Edmund did not defend himself. A knock sounded at the chamber door. Ruth entered, carrying a narrow ledger wrapped in oilcloth. I kept this before Vane dismissed me, she said. Every coal cart was weighed before entering the estate. The book showed that Northmere coal had been delivered to the Western Marsh for 6 weeks. Each shipment was approved by Vane and charged to Edmund's reserve account. More importantly, the quantities matched the production tallies found inside the hidden furnace. This proves the operation was not an emergency, Bell said. It was planned before Lady Adelaide lost control of the works. A royal messenger arrived before midnight. Lord Westmere had called an emergency hearing at the palace for the following morning. His written accusation named Adelaide as the former superintendent responsible for poisoning Fort Halden and attempting to contaminate the king's escort. He intended to place her on trial before Bell could complete his investigation. Edmund crushed the summons in his hand. He controls the Military Supply Commission. The council will hear him first. Then we will answer with evidence, Adelaide said. She gathered the counterfeit stamp, the apothecary's report, Weller's statement, the coal ledger, and the forged orders. Westmere possessed rank, influence, and the authority Edmund had spent years trying to obtain. Adelaide possessed the truth her husband had tried to remove with her chair. By morning, the Royal Council would decide which one carried greater weight. Before dawn, Harrow asked to speak with Major Bell. He had realized that Westmere intended to blame the entire conspiracy on him and Vane. In exchange for having his cooperation recorded, Harrow surrendered 3 letters he had hidden inside Edmund's account cabinet. Each carried Westmere's private seal. The letters ordered Harrow to fund the hidden furnace through Edmund's reserve account, copy Adelaide's signature, and ensure that selected barrels reached Fort Halden and the king's escort. They also promised Vane and Harrow shares in Northmere once Ashcombe lost its military contract. By morning, the Royal Council chamber was crowded with officers, ministers, and noblemen. Westmere stood before them with Adelaide's forged dispatch. Duchess Adelaide controlled Ashcombe when the poisoned salt was produced, he declared. After her husband removed her, she attempted to destroy her successor and reclaim the works. Adelaide entered with Ruth, Amos, Thomas Weller, and Major Bell. She did not answer Westmere's accusation with outrage. She answered it with evidence. First came the contaminated salt and the apothecary's report confirming arsenic. Then the counterfeit stamp, the barrels built outside Ashcombe's standards, and the black clay connecting them to the western furnace. Ruth presented the coal ledger. Amos presented the hidden production tallies. Together, they proved that Vane's secret operation had been active for 6 weeks. Weller testified that he had refused to certify the furnace. Lord Westmere then warned me not to interfere, he said. When my seal was stolen, Vane's men imprisoned me. Westmere dismissed the testimony as the word of frightened employees and a resentful inspector. Then Bell placed Harrow's letters on the council table. Westmere's confidence disappeared. The letters established the entire chain. Westmere had financed Northmere, Vane had managed the hidden production, and Harrow had forged the orders that placed Adelaide's name upon the poisoned barrels. You intended Fort Halden to discredit Ashcombe, Adelaide said. The shipment to the king's escort would ensure the Crown cancelled our contract before an independent investigation could begin. Northmere would then become the only supplier prepared to replace us. Westmere turned toward Edmund. None of this could have happened without the Duke's authorization. The chamber fell silent. It was his final defense. If he could not escape, he would drag Edmund into the same charge of treason. Edmund rose. My wife warned me that Vane intended to remove independent inspection, he said. I read her report and authorized the furnace anyway. Harrow stared at him. Vane lowered his head. I did not authorize poison or forged shipments, Edmund continued. But I concealed the operation from Adelaide because her objections threatened the political appointment Westmere had promised me. My ambition gave these men the authority, money, and secrecy they required. He placed his genuine letters beside the forgeries. These prove what Harrow falsified. They also prove what I knowingly allowed. For the first time, Edmund named his betrayal before the same class of men whose approval he had valued above his wife's judgment. The king ordered Westmere, Vane, and Harrow held for trial on charges of attempted murder, abduction, fraud, and conspiracy against the crown. Northmere's accounts and property were seized pending investigation. Then he turned to Edmund. You did not design this crime, Duke of Ashcombe, but you removed the safeguards that might have prevented it and silenced the woman who warned you. Edmund bowed his head. Finally, the king addressed Adelaide. Your name is cleared, but restoring your reputation is not enough. The works you built remain legally attached to the estate of the husband who took them from you. He looked toward the iron ring of keys lying among the evidence. Tell this council, Duchess Adelaide, what must be taken from the Duke before Ashcombe can be trusted again? Adelaide looked at the iron ring of keys. No single person should control Ashcombe's production, inspection, accounts, and military seals again. She asked the Crown to suspend every contract held under Edmund's authority until the works passed an independent inspection. Vane's dismissed employees were to be restored, and the poisoned soldiers and imprisoned workers compensated from Northmere's frozen assets. Then she addressed the future of the salt works. Edmund would grant a long-term lease to a trust established for Adelaide's separate use. 2 independent trustees would protect its income from his control. Adelaide would manage production, while Ruth, Amos, and a Crown-appointed examiner would hold separate authority over labor, accounts, and inspection. No military barrel could leave Ashcombe without 3 signatures. The king accepted the proposal as a condition for any future royal contract. Edmund surrendered his place on the Royal Trade Council and was removed from all authority over military supply. He also agreed to rebuild the contaminated furnace buildings from his private fortune. Westmere, Vane, and Harrow remained in custody awaiting trial. The surviving records, Harrow's letters, Weller's testimony, and the poisoned samples would determine their final sentences. When the council had finished, Edmund stood before Adelaide. I took the work you built because Vane's promises served my ambition, he said. I treated your knowledge as disobedience and your warnings as an obstacle. When soldiers fell ill, I still tried to protect the contract before protecting the truth. He spoke loudly enough for every person in the chamber to hear. I did not intend their crimes, but I knowingly gave them secrecy, money, and authority after my wife warned me not to. What followed began with my choice. Adelaide had once wanted nothing more than to hear him admit that. Now the confession could restore her name, but it could not restore her marriage. I require a formal separation, she said. Pain crossed Edmund's face, but he did not bargain. Through a deed of separation, he granted Adelaide the Western Dower House, an independent income, and freedom from his domestic authority. He also renounced any personal claim to the profits of the salt works for the duration of its trust. Public harm demanded more than a private apology. Before leaving the palace, Edmund signed a statement restoring Adelaide's authority and admitting that her dismissal had been unjustified. Copies were sent to every garrison, supplier, and estate office that had received the forged accusations. 3 months later, Adelaide returned to the rebuilt gates of Ashcombe. The workers stood on both sides of the road. Samuel Croft and the other imprisoned laborers had resumed their positions. Ruth now supervised refining, while Amos represented the carters and marsh workers on the inspection board. The plaque bearing Adelaide's name had not been restored. In its place were the words, Ashcombe Salt Works, no barrel without 3 seals. Edmund waited outside the gates. He no longer wore the badge of the Royal Trade Council. I came to return these, he said. He held out the iron ring Vane had taken from her. Adelaide accepted it. For a moment, Edmund appeared to believe the gesture might carry her back toward the life they had shared. Instead, she removed the warehouse key and gave it to Ruth. The account room key went to Amos. The key to the military seal cabinet would remain with the independent examiner. Adelaide kept only the key to the main gate. No one person should possess every door again, she said. Edmund looked at the divided keys and understood that the rule included him. Will you ever return to Ashcombe House? I will meet you when the business of the estate requires it. I will not return as your wife. He lowered his head and stepped aside. Adelaide unlocked the gates. Beyond them, the restored evaporation beds shone beneath the morning sun. Workers opened the channels one by one, allowing clear seawater to spread across the shallow pans. 11 years earlier, Adelaide had built Ashcombe beneath her husband's name. Now she walked into it under her own authority and left the gate open behind her.